lagers, do we need to know?
Know the science names.
Okay.
Yeah. So primary differentiators between these two, one I listed on here, and then one in hindsight I didn't list on here. People usually think of, in terms of how they make distinctions between ale yeast and lager yeast, they use temperature and top and or bottom fermenting. So you can see these temperature windows here. Ale yeast typically going to be at warmer temperatures, a little bit more active, and also faster fermentations. So all of those things kind of work in conjunction. Warmer temperature is going to drive more activity, is going to ferment faster. Lager yeast operates at cooler temperatures and generally ferments towards the bottom of the tank. So, and it will also take longer for those fermentations to take place. So that's why, if we look at local breweries here in town, not many are producing lagers. One reason is they may not have the cold space in order to lager the amount of beer that they would be producing, but also it takes longer, and therefore you're hogging up a piece of stainless steel for 6+ weeks, whereas it may only be 3 weeks with or less with an ale, something fermented with ale yeast. So another distinction is that the ale yeasts are going to produce compounds, esters and phenols of various types as a result of fermentation. As a general rule, if you go higher in temperature, the more of those things are going to happen and come out. So if you were to take something like an American ale yeast for a pale ale and ferment it at 90 degrees, you would get a lot of undesirable characteristics that result from excess production of various compounds. So lager yeast, on the other hand, are going to be cleaner fermentations, so generally no real esters or phenols to speak of. And so in the beers that we've tasted, we've kind of seen that. With, again, ester flavors, we'll kind of touch on some of those here in a minute, but ester flavors generally being thought of as fruity. It's kind of a general, kind of a vague way to assign that term, but I think with practice you'll better understand what that really means in terms of what are fruity esters versus beers that don't have them. So think about the times we've been tasting like blonde ales or Kolsch, against things like Helles or Pilsner or other lagers. Essentially, those ale yeasts are going to come across as a little bit more, we'll call it flavorful or distinctive in terms of how the yeast is being showcased. And the lagers really will allow the other ingredients to come forth a little bit more easily. And then we have wild yeast. So one example being Brettanomyces. It's the most common, or at least the most commonly talked about and utilized. So in some cases, so we also have various non-brewing strains of Saccharomyces that can occur in the wild, or that can make their way into your beers. And either of those things, Brettanomyces or wild Saccharomyces strains, they have the potential to produce off flavors or take the beer in a direction that you don't necessarily want it to go. But both of them, or Brettanomyces in particular, does have certain styles where it is utilized intentionally, or it is allowed to be in the beer. Various lambic styles, probably the best example of something that utilizes Brettanomyces as well as other wild bacterias. I guess not mistaking the fact that Brettanomyces is in fact a wild yeast and not a bacteria. So yeah, any questions on those? How they work, what they are? Chip cook. So other non-Saccharomyces organisms. Generally, like all of these are types of bacteria. So you have Acetobacter, produces acetic acid and acetone, both of those to varying degrees. Generally considered an off flavor in nearly all styles. However, in Flanders styles, those are characterized by that acetic flavor. So if somebody asks, is a Flanders red, you have a Flanders red that exhibits acetic characters, is that acceptable for the style? The answer is yes. Again, lambic encompasses all of these. American wild ales or wild ales, things that don't necessarily fall under the exact rules of lambic, but are still wild fermentations, can utilize all of these. But outside of those, if you have Acetobacter in an English bitter, that's bad. That's not a desirable flavor. Lactobacillus produces lactic acid, so common in Berliner Weiss, and ideally, if you're brewing with Lactobacillus intentionally, as in the case of Berliner Weiss, most of the time you try and get to where it's just producing lactic acid, and it can produce other compounds, acetic acid or various things, in the presence of oxygen. So, little brewery tip, if you're brewing your Berliner Weiss tomorrow, try and eliminate oxygen from Lactobacillus. It does not like that environment. Pediococcus is another one that produces various types of acids and all other things. Produces a lot of diacetyl initially, so in something like a lambic beer or a wild ale, a good example would be if you've ever run into people telling you that one of your upland sours that you just sold in tasted buttery. It's not because they tried to ferment it in 7 days and then bottled it. It's because when they packaged it, they bottle conditioned it, and that re-fermentation in the bottle with that Pediococcus being present created diacetyl after the product was bottled. And so the good thing about that is in something like a wild ale or lambic, in the presence of Brettanomyces, Brettanomyces loves to eat up diacetyl and all sorts of other stuff. So over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, in some cases, the Brettanomyces will metabolize that diacetyl, and that characteristic will go away completely. So it's really pretty interesting if you ever get wild beers that show that buttery character. That's why you'll see certain wild ale producers or lambic producers aging their bottles after being packaged for 3 to 6 months before they release the beer. It's not because they just want to age it, it's because it really needs the time after being packaged. So, continuation and fermentation. This guy doesn't know what it is. You guys are about to. So, pretty simple process, really. Fermentation is the process of yeast consuming fermentable sugars. So, backtracking a step in the brewing process, a couple steps really. If you guys think back to the mash process, so that's the point in which you're taking those grains and converting those starches and sugars into forms of sugar that are fermentable by these yeasts. And so then you fast forward, go through the boil, post-boil, cool it down. You're fermenting fermentable sugars. Not all sugars are fermentable, or not all sugars are fermentable by all strains of yeast. So really, in this case, for this exam, you don't have to worry too much about various types of sugars and which ones are fermentable, how and when, just kind of know the basics. And then the fact that once fermentation takes place, you have two main things that are produced: alcohol and carbon dioxide. So those are two byproducts that are always going to be there from fermentation. And of course, you'll have a number of other things that are produced, compounds that we've talked about, esters, phenols, acids in some cases. But they will likely ask you what two things are produced from fermentation. Alcohol and carbon dioxide is the answer. So you might see two letters AA next to a type of yeast, or maybe with a recipe for a beer recipe, and that refers to apparent attenuation, which is essentially a percentage of sugars that are consumed by the yeast during fermentation. So with the sugars from grains, malted barley, not all of those are fermentable by brewer's yeast. And so you'll see various ranges we'll get to in a minute, like where some yeasts will consume more of those sugars and some will consume less of those sugars. Sources of sugar to be fermented could be coming from grains, malted barley, that is then mashed to convert those sugars into those that are fermentable. Dextrose, basically pure sugar. Candy sugar, syrups, honey, etc. All of those are fermentable to varying degrees. You'll find you don't necessarily need to know it, but if you're curious, it's interesting to look up. Probably a book like How to Brew by John Palmer would show these various fermentables and to what degree they actually attenuate or ferment out. Some like honey ferments all but like 10 or 15%, so it's not entirely fermented out. But things like dextrose and even candy sugar, maple syrup, all of those things are fermented out completely.
What the units are apparent attenuation? Is that
It's a percentage.
Okay.
Yep. So a real world example of if you're brewing, say, a double IPA, and your grain bill projects that you would get 8% ABV. What a lot of brewers do, both with that style and with other styles, is say they may want to hit 9% ABV, something a little bit higher alcohol, but not increase the body of the beer, like still maintain a medium or lighter body beer. Then that's where they'll add dextrose to the grist bill, and that extra dextrose is going to ferment out completely, so it will add that extra percent that you're looking for, but without adding really any residual flavor or body to the beer. So that's common in a lot of different American styles, especially as you get higher in alcohol, and a lot of Belgian styles as well. So things like Belgian triple, starts with a very simple recipe of base malts, and then they add a bunch of sugar to it, and that's how you get to that 9-10% range on Belgian triple.
What do they do with like Apocalypse Cow, like that lactose sugar?
Well, so lactose sugar is different in that lactose sugar is not entirely fermentable. So it's actually like much less fermentable than these others. So that's a really good question. So lactose sugar contributes body to the beer because all those sugars don't ferment out. And then prior to fermentation, it's important that the wort or pre-fermented beer is properly oxygenated. So if you're a home brewer, then you'll dump your stuff into your carboy and then you can swirl it around, or you might get a little pump to shoot some oxygen in there. If you are a commercial brewery, then as it comes off of the wort chiller, it'll have an aeration stone that basically just pumps straight oxygen in line to the beer as it's being pumped into the fermenter. So, of course, they have a lot better systems at a commercial scale, but it's important that some oxygen is introduced to the beer, to the wort, before it's fermented, because the yeast needs that in order to start fermentation. And also, if you guys remember back to Steve and Bob's presentation, not fermentation, when they were talking about whatever they were talking about, it came up that Sierra Nevada bottle conditions and can conditions of beers, and an advantage of doing so is having that yeast in the bottle will help to scavenge any residual oxygen, versus if it were not there, whatever finished, total packaged oxygen is in the beer is going to remain. So you want finished beer, you want to remove oxygen. Oxygen is bad in every case, but prior to fermentation. Does that make sense? Various brewer's yeast. This is a brewer. That was the first one that came up on Google. So common examples of a few different ones. So just running through them: American ale yeast, English ale yeast, Weizen yeast, various Belgian yeast. Jumping back up, and you'll see also, so these are attenuation numbers here. So if you guys if you want to look up a bunch of yeast, you can go to a site like White Labs or White Yeast and start scrolling through all their various things, and you'll see temperature windows, so windows of operation for these guys, which I don't know if so we touched on it briefly, but the general windows of operation are going to be between 55 and 70 for ale yeast, generally closer to this 65 or 70 range. 55 is for hybrids like Kolsch or California Common. But yeah, so you'll see that, and if you look up any given yeast profile, you'll see temperature window or range, and you also see this range of attenuation. So attenuation can also be influenced by pitch rates or cell counts. So when brewers I think it's been said before, when they are adding yeast into the wort prior to fermentation, that action of adding yeast to wort is referred to as pitching. So you pitch the yeast. And I don't remember where I was going with that.
More yeast, more attenuation?
Yeah, so cell counts. And when you're pitching yeast, you can't just add any given amount. It's important that you have a healthy and sufficient quantity of yeast cells in order to ferment the beer. For purposes of this test, you don't really have to get too caught up in how many cells of yeast do I need to ferment a Belgian triple? Don't worry about that. But just in terms of
pitch?
Yeah, you can. It's much harder to do that than underpitch, because at some point, having too much yeast in the beer is going to create stress on the yeast, and you're going to have these dying yeast cells that hang around and can impart off flavors on the beer. So yes, you can overpitch, but I think it's more common, especially in a commercial setting, where brewers are trying to conserve resources, that they underpitch, thinking that they can eke out, this quantity of yeast for another batch, and that may result in overly stressing the yeast, which will cause, it will cause it to not attenuate fully or properly. So yeast is, it's like a little human being. It's got to be happy, and it's got to be healthy, and it's got to do all this stuff. It has to have all these conditions optimized in order to function properly. So yeah, American ale yeast, known as Chico yeast, cleaner fermentation with, I put moderate to low. It's usually in the low range of esters, versus something like English ale yeast, also known as English ale yeast, is generally going to attenuate to a lesser degree than American ale yeast and produce more esters. So that's just a trait of those types of yeast strains. If you have Sam Smith, or you have Fuller's, or you have these English style beers or Scottish style beers, those fruity characteristics are going to come through more just due to the nature of the yeast strain. Weizen yeast, so found in Hefeweizen. So this specific strain is known for producing notes of banana and clove. So banana, I should have listed the compound name, but isoamyl acetate, and clove, this 4-vinyl glycol thing. So you guys saw that on your styles deal. Again, clove, 4-vinyl glycol is clove, and clove is often associated with Hefeweizen, not Marzen. Belgian yeast, so there's a few different kinds, all of which kind of do the same thing in terms of producing various, they're more ester forward, especially compared to American ale yeast, but also compared to English ale yeast, you're going to get more phenolic characters as well. So more spicy characters. Could be, clove, could be black pepper, things of that sort.
Grass.
And you say grass?
Grass.
Grass. Yeah. So those have there's a little bit broader range here because I put it to cover really the three of these. So Saison has, that one's a little bit more aggressive and can attenuate a little bit higher, especially compared to these others. Whereas the others, Abbey, Trappist yeast, fall more in the 75 to 80% range. So still higher on average than most of the other strains. And they generally can tolerate higher temperatures. So in the case of some Trappist beers, you may hear about them fermenting super warm, which again is going to produce more of that, more of those ester characters. So more, stone fruit or apple or pear, whatever it may be, and especially in the case of Saison as well. So some of those Saisons will be fermented as high as 90 degrees, and that yeast seems to be robust enough that it can tolerate that without producing a ton of crappy flavors or dying off. So.
Do you ever blend yeast?
Yeah, people do that. I think it kind of depends on the beers and really what characteristics you're going for. I would say these days a common example would be something like Northeast style IPA. So they may use something like an English yeast, or for those that maybe aren't going full bore into the whole hazy effect, they may use a blend of American and English style yeast to where you get a little bit more ester production, and those esters have these kind of interactions with hop compounds, volatile hop compounds that are also within the beer, and especially if you're going for one thing we didn't really touch on was flocculation. If you're going for more of a hazy or more of an unfiltered look and you want that yeast to stay in solution, then things like English yeast are more likely to do that, whereas American yeast has a little bit higher flocculation rate. So what that means is that as the beer finishes up fermentation and you basically transition to packaging, before doing so, you want to remove the yeast, most of the yeast from the beer, from the finished beer. And you do so by chilling it down or cold crashing. Rachel, you've asked this question before. When they talk about cold crashing the beer, you are cooling the beer down to a temperature below that kind of window of operation, and that causes the yeast to flocculate, so it kind of bundles up together and falls out of solution, which is really convenient and nice because you would otherwise have all this yeast floating around, and it makes this really like murky, soupy looking liquid, and that's not very attractive. So, yeah, I think that was it as far as yeast flocculation. Oh, the other thing related to flocculation and kind of filtering the beer is towards the earlier on in the process, well, no, let's say later on in the process, brewers will also use finings. So basically, these things that they put into the beer to help facilitate or accelerate that clarification or flocculation process. So if they don't have a filter or if they don't have a centrifuge, but they still want a way to remove yeast from the beer, then they'll use finings to help speed up that process. So those could be Irish moss in the case of like a homebrewer situation, or it could be isinglass, or there's others that are probably not really important that you know. But yeah, that's kind of how the finings work. That's pretty much everything you need to know about yeast. So yeah, do you guys have any questions? Crystal clear? All right, well, let's taste some beers.
Nope. That is definitely a safe.
That is. That's German pills. Oh no.
Also, Charles may have mentioned it, but
I've said nothing.
no food tonight. Sorry about that. I didn't notice. If you want food, then just go to La Margarita for this Sierra Nevada thing and eat there. So that's.
Is that?
What do you need to come talk to you or something? I don't know.
Yes, you're Sierra Nevada, man.
Preview.
Your call.
We bought a lot of random things. Shoot, are we getting pills? Random pills on draft? I don't think so either. It's just package, isn't it? Yeah.
It could be, it just depends what, you know how it is with mine. They feel like doing it. What is it?
Oh, you're
New Rounds.
Oh, yeah.
Daredevil. Oh, Daredevil German Pills. We're not getting package. Oh, we're not getting package? No, we are getting package. Or we're not getting package.
Sorry,
Well, just keep guessing.
I'm so confused. I'm myself.
We should get draft, but.
Very cool. Glad Shane told me
Where
to
everything
draft. Glad Shane told me to like guarantee an account that I get it.
Did he? Then they'll do it. He'll just cut the bottle, or the canning runs, he'll do. They will. They should be okay.
Get enough beer to support
If Shane said he'll do one then he'll do draft, what they'll do is they'll cut the canning run instead, fill up less can.
It'll be like slip screen where we were out.
Yeah,
Sold it today.
that's what I'm saying, that's what I think's gonna end up happening, is he'll get us.
Are we getting more slip screen? Where's
No,
that?
that was it.
That was it?
Yeah,
Cool.
that was it.
What was it?
They're rolling through it, yeah. What was it?
What is it?
Slipstream.
Exactly.
Slipstream,
When do we get pills?
No, when it's ready.
Sausage Reaver came in today, 2 cakes and half plates.
You're welcome.
Pills?
Just two? Yeah, I sold them both, so don't try that.
Too late, they're ready.
What, I didn't get them?
No, didn't go to you.
Oh, man, don't say that, because then that means I gotta run.
we took the Venerate.
I put one in, so.
We,
I had all night sold when somebody beat me to it. Be here now.
I was gonna say, be here now?
Yeah, that went it all night, but I don't even took them.
I got
$40
$40.
I got
two of them.
I emailed Nick like, I didn't see it for like. I emailed Nick right away. I skipped Charles step. No, I finished both, but it was like a half hour.
I don't know who
I
that.
got two, but it was.
What, saucy?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Got them both.
I don't know where to
I got both. Somebody wanted black hair today. I was like, you should buy Natural Liberty.
Yeah.
That's. They're like, they want saucy, and I was like, we want saucy, and I was like, well, you can have Natural Liberty.
Sauce next week.
We just got it back on growler pills, so that should be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know who to complain to. Oh, yeah, I forgot, you're sitting right behind me, yeah. Hey, at least your beer's in the van. Sorry, we wanna sell your beer.
Ears in the van.
If you guys.
You have an interview today?
If you guys wanna talk to.
Oh, did Charles say that?
me
Or-
about, I don't know,
I just
like,
wanna make sure.
setting the thermostat and calling somebody to fix the cooler, or HR problems, I can totally help you out.
Everything else just go to Steve.
I'd like to know all the HR problems, Steve.
Everything else.
All the complaints,
No
not
fucking
Steve.
clue.
We have several complaints about Steve and his
Doesn't make everyone feel uncomfortable.
Just,
Most of the time.
Listening
if
to
you
the
get any
conversation.
trouble, just, if he gives you any trouble, just ask him if he's got any gas. You'll got gas?
Steve, anything?
Have you not heard that story?
No, I haven't.
He trolls the Speedway Instagram account. Every single time they post
Every
something,
single post.
he puts, y'all got gas?
Who does it?
Steve, Ruby, the brewer, owner,
Oh.
everything.
Yeah.
Abby sampling tonight, Goose.
I forgot about that.
Fun.
No longer.
I gotta start doing.
I sold one to Mr. G's.
Yeah, you're gonna have a good time with that.
Oh, yeah.
It's gonna be so much fun.
Until I thought it was gonna suck.
That's
That's
why
why
I
it
said
said you get a free sandwich. Like free
sandwiches?
I'll do
I'm in.
anything.
Yeah.
Tastings and Goose, free sandwiches. I'm in.
Free sandwiches from Goose. I don't care what I'm doing.
So we elected with this class, rather than to do the this or that kind of thing that we've been doing, we're going to, Anderson's, we're gonna go back to, just to kind of mix it up, we're gonna do the thing where we kind of drink the beer, analyze it, take a stab at what the style's gonna be, why you guys think that. Kind of go back to, styles were probably the one, did I miss anybody? I just can't count.
You,
You, Evan and I, we're still a little more. So our thought was, you know, going over everybody's kind of tests they've taken so far, styles were far and away the hardest part, or maybe the part you guys did the worst in. So yeah, so kind of drink through it, look at it, analyze it, you know, think about all those ways that we kind of look over it and work on what style makes the most sense, and then we'll kind of go around and see what everybody thought. Let's just sit here and drink, I know what it is.
There's ranch and carrots in the fridge.
Who grabbed those?
What bread?
Come on, at least the range.
Gravy ranch.
Fountain. Chocolate fountain range.
I think that was the ranch.